Good evening and welcome to Wales Online's live rugby debate show. My name is Matt Southcombe and I'll be your host tonight, and I'm delighted to be joined by our rugby writer Simon Thomas. Only one story dominating the headlines in the last 24 hours. The shock news really, breaking yesterday that Byron Hayward, Wales's defence coach, has parted ways and stood down from his role. First of all, what was your reaction to that? You were working yesterday. How do you feel about the way this has all transpired? It's a little bit chaotic.
My immediate reaction is you picked a good day to be off. That's what I was going to say. It was a crazy day. I mean, not just that, we had the new WRU chairman at about 5 o'clock as well. Talk about getting the news out on a Sunday. It's funny because, I mean, the readers won't know, the listeners won't know that we get kind of notifications that there's going to be an announcement from the Welsh squad, and you'll be told, or there'll be a squad update at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. And generally, it's something related to a player injury. You perhaps know that certain players are, facing fitness tests, and you expect that to be the update. So when we clicked on it and it said Byron Hayward departing, we kind of knew our day was going to take a different turn, and it's become the big story, a huge story, really. Less than a year, that's a short tenure for any international coach. And as you know, and as the readers and listeners will know, whenever anything like this happens, the immediate demand is, what's the true story?
Mm-hmm.
Give us the inside story. What's really going on? And it's difficult because Welsh rugby is a rumour mill. And I've been inundated with people who've got their own theories about it. I've seen this on WhatsApp. I've seen this on social media. A mate of mine has told me this. It's difficult because, in a way, if we kind of printed all the unsubstantiated rumours out there, we'd be pilloried. Whereas I think people lap them up when it's citizen journalists on social media. I understand it. Everyone's interested, and that's part of why we're in jobs, because people are fascinated by Welsh rugby and the machinations and the developments. But I guess you kind of have to cut to the chase with a lot of these things and ask the questions of the people directly involved. And that's what we had the opportunity today to do with Wayne Pivac turning up for the Zoom press conference. I'm glad he fronted up. I think that was the right thing to do. Quite often on the Monday or the Tuesday ahead of a game, it would be one of his assistants, be it Neil Jenkins, John Humphreys, Stephen Jones. I think it was right, given the magnitude of what's happened, that Wayne should front up. And he did answer all the questions politely. I mean, I did get the impression, I mean, you probably read the transcript. It did feel like the answers were very prepared, and I guess that's inevitable, isn't it? He kind of would have known the kind of questions. And there were two key questions I wanted to put to him, because there has been speculation about whether players played any part in what has happened, in terms of whether there was any issues with Byron or his coaching. I wanted to ask, directly, head-to-head, Wayne on that question, and whether any complaints had been made to him or to WRU. He answered that. I also wanted to know, ultimately, was it his decision? Was it Wayne Pivac's decision that Byron should go, or was it something that was taken above his head? On both questions, he didn't really address the player thing too specifically. What he said there was that there's discussion with players on all issues. So we didn't really make a lot of progress there. I guess probably weren't expecting to. And on the decision about why Byron went, he confirmed that ultimately it was his decision. It was Wayne Pivac's decision.
Just a message to our viewers quickly. If you want to get your comments in, I'll put the questions to Simon, anything you might have to say. We'll chat about it, and we'll see what you guys have to say as well. This is as much about you as it is about us. But Simon, moving on a little bit then, you touched on the press conference there. You touched on the sort of the rumour mill that's been going on, relentlessly in the last 24 hours, I guess. A lot of talk about player power. Do you get the impression that the players are convinced by this current coaching staff? Obviously, results haven't gone their way. Performances have not been great. But what's your take on that sort of theory?
I mean, it's really hard. I'll be front up. I haven't spoken to a player who has told me that he has an issue with the management. Now, I mean, sometimes you will speak to players off the record. I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've built up a lot of relationship with the players, and you will chat to them. I haven't heard anything directly at all from any player. I think it's important for me to say that. You do hear whispers around that there is suggestions that not all the players are happy with the way things are going. I don't know. I can't say that for definite one way or the other. And no doubt what will happen this week, Matt, is you'll have players being put up for interview ahead of the Ireland game, and they'll be asked that. And you kind of know already what the answers are going to be. It's almost one of those stories where if there is anything, I mean, God, I lived day and night and hour by hour through the Mike Riddick departure. I lived and breathed the whole player power thing there with Alfie and the Scrum 5 show. It's a time I'll never forget, and it's become a phrase, player power, that's become embedded in Welsh rugby culture. And whenever there is a kind of shock departure of a coach, which this was, you do get people questioning whether players played any part of it, whether there was any player disquiet, was there issues of Byron's coaching, are there issues beyond that with the Wales coaching team? As I say, I haven't heard anything directly from players, but there are obviously sort of rumours doing the rounds with people questioning whether everything's happy in the camp. I guess we'll get a further indication of what the mood is in the camp, but the way things go in the Ireland game. I mean, you saw yourself at Parc y Scarlets with the Scotland game, and I saw on occasion some of the body language. Was it just frustration at the result of the performance? Was the frustration of the way things are going in camp? There were a few flailing arms and a few shouts. It's very hard to say. I mean, I've seen lots of rugby teams come off the rails. Is this Wales team off the rails? I've countless times been asked the whole thing about, has the coach lost the dressing room? Has this coach lost the dressing room? I think we're going to find out a lot more over the next few weeks, and whether they can successfully circle the wagons and start to all sing from the same song sheet. But I said to Wayne Pivac at the end of my questions, when you've lost 5 games in a row, you've lost a coach inside a year, can you understand the perception that it looks like a bit of a mess? And I've asked a few Wales coaches questions like that in the past, and they would have ripped me one. I think it's all better too. I think, but he answered quite politely, and people can see the full transcript on our website. But yeah, it's been an eventful 24, 48 hours certainly.
I guess let's talk about the defence a little bit, just briefly then, without getting too technical about it. Statistics will tell you that it's Wales's worst defensive display in the Six Nations since 2010 in terms of points conceded. But looking at the last 2 games in particular, we know the Ireland game, way back, seems like a lifetime ago now at the start of the year. That game in particular was a bit of a mess from a Welsh point of view. But I mean, if you're looking at the games against France and Scotland, were the defensive issues really that bad in those 2 games? There's 1 or 2 in Paris maybe, but did we see this sort of thing coming?
Well, there's an elephant in the room, isn't there? And it's called Shaun Edwards. And everything that Byron Hayward did was going to be in the context of the success of Shaun Edwards. In a way, you could argue that Byron's job is almost as hard as Pivac's job stepping into Warren Gatland's shoes, because, through success and failure and the triumphs, the one thing that was pretty much consistent was that Wales were one of the meanest defensive teams in world rugby, very hard to break down. So when you go from that to a situation where they clearly have been a lot more porous and fragile in defence, then inevitably people are going to raise questions about Shaun Edwards' departure and what life after Shaun Edwards is like. And that's, unfortunately, the thing that's been hanging over Byron Hayward from day one. If you look at Wales under Edwards, it was extremely well drilled. I mean, he's the kind of guy who gets responses out of players. You don't want to miss a tackle when you know you have to go into a debrief with Shaun Edwards. And it's been accentuated. It's become an increasing hot topic because he's obviously gone to France and has played a key part in them re-emerging as a major force. At the same time as, he's done that, Wales have lost 5 in a row. So that's always the bit in the background. The one thing, without getting too technical, that I have been concerned about is if you look the way that Wales played under Edwards, with the blitz or the rush defence, whatever you want to call it, it was a red wave. It was all as one, up as a blanket, because it's a high risk, high reward strategy. I was talking to Clive Griffiths about it yesterday, who was very much in the same playbook as Sean Edwards. We were talking about all of this, and he made that point. If it works, it's fantastic. If you get it slightly wrong, you can be in big trouble. Under Edwards, it was so well drilled. Everybody up as one line. A lot of it coming from 13, pushing in. It worked so well. You've seen in Wales' games of late, I think particularly the France game, there were a few dogleg situations with players rushing up individually. It wasn't as one line. Now, whether that was a case of the defence being sort of tinkered with and, adapted a bit from what Edwards had in place, we don't know. But if you're going to do that style of defence, if you get mistakes like that, you're going to really suffer, and Wales have. So again, it's all really about everything has been in the context of Edwards and what he achieved.
All right, I'm just going to bring in a few questions from the viewers now, and we've got one in from Cleon Rees Wyatt. With the way that we've performed recently and now the issue behind the scenes, where do you think this leaves the Welsh rugby team in terms of moving forward? And I want to link in another one from Owain Vivian. What are the immediate plans in the short term to cover the defence in the absence of Byron Hayward?
We'll do the second one first because that's an easy one to answer. In the short term, Gethin Jenkins will take on the primary defensive duties. Now, Gethin has been in place for less than a month. He obviously came in to replace Sam Warburton as the technical breakdown and defence coach, very much a contact area focus. Now, I think he's going to widen that responsibility to work with the defence. And if you look at Gethin's career, he's one of the greatest forward defenders that Wales have ever had. Absolutely extraordinary tackle rate. Revolutionised the loose head prop role in that department and over the ball as well. And he was the guy who set high standards in terms of his defence, but also demanded high standards of those around him. I think it's pretty well documented that Gethin could moan for Wales, but a lot of his moaning or issues he would raise weren't raised because he was trying to knock people down, in my experience, or players around him. It's because he wanted everyone to be up to his standards, and he cared so much about winning, and he wanted everything to be done to a higher level. And so he really brought that around the players around him. Now, can you transfer that to a coaching role? A lot of these times, when you have great players moving into coaching, one of the big challenges, certainly at club level and academy level and semi-pro level, which is where Gethin has worked for the last year or so, is that it probably takes a little bit of time getting used to the fact that not all these charges can do things what you could do. They're not all as talented. Now, obviously, when you move up to international level, you're dealing with a higher level of player. I mean, Gethin won't he won't put up with any nonsense. He'll say it as it is. He will demand high standards, but he's still a very young and inexperienced coach. So you can look at it two ways. It's really putting him in, a high pressure situation. But then the other hand of it is that it's a massive opportunity for him. If he makes a success of the defensive situation and that tightens up and that is shored up, well, he's going to be putting up his hand in a big way to have that role on a permanent level. There's a couple of interesting things on that. Wayne Pivac mentioned Mark Kennard, who was the defensive analyst, and he said he was going to have an important role now, providing backup. I guess it's such a studied art now, isn't it? So he'll be important. And on the longer term, he did say that they'd be looking at all the possible defence coaches, and that certain names have come across their desk already. So yeah, Gethin's got 4 games, hasn't he, really, to sort of lay his marker down, perhaps to have that role. And then with that in the background is the realization that you've got other people who could come into the mix. I mean, just throw a name out there. Look at Mark Jones, who's been in defensive role with the Crusaders and just won a Super Rugby title, hasn't he? proud Welshman, played for Wales, previously part of the Wales coaching team. If you're looking for someone, high-level defence coach, he ticks a lot of those boxes, doesn't he? So, yeah, but it's kind of getting its first crack at it, doesn't he?
Steve Tandy as well, doing very well in Scotland.
Yeah. On the other point of, I think, the original first question about where do Wales stand now as a team and looking ahead to the autumn, I've said really over the last month, you understand that it takes time with a new coaching team. You understand that it's going to take time to implement your ideas, put everything into practice. That's fine. I think what concerns me is what I've really been looking for is a kind of cogent, clear game plan and an obvious evolution taking place. Now, you were seeing a little bit of that, I thought, in the Six Nations in terms of the way Wales wanted to play. But these last two games against France and against Scotland have been very disappointing on that front because I couldn't tell you with absolute clarity what the game plan is. Now, perhaps part of that is because quite a bit of those two games, they've kind of been on the back foot. Defensive issues in France, lack of ball carrying generally in both games, and in particular in Scotland, the breakdown a major issue. So there was a very limited, perhaps, ball. But even when they did have ball, you did sense that other than our first phase strike, when it went through multiple phases, you tended to see there was a bit of running out of ideas. So that's the biggest thing for me for this Autumn Nations Cup. I really feel that we need to see a clear game plan and get a clearer understanding of what Wayne Pivac, Stephen Jones and Jonathan Humphreys are looking to do tactically and in terms of the shape of the team and the way it plays.
There's been a couple of comments coming in about the other coaches. We've had one in from Matthew Tovey raising Jonathan Humphreys. Should he be looking over his shoulder a little bit, the way that the forward pack has performed, particularly set piece, looking at line-out defence in particular there? Wales have looked a little bit ropey. Jamie Phillips as well is saying, how long will the WRU realistically give Wayne Pivac? Lots of rumours, as you've touched on, Si, flying around social media. The Welsh Rugby Union are looking at someone like Scott Robertson is already being mentioned. What do you think? Should Wayne Pivac be a little bit concerned about the way things are going?
Yeah, if you believe some of the things that were doing the rounds on social media last night, Scott Robertson was already on the plane over here. It's an amazing thing, as I said earlier, the rumour mill in Welsh rugby, and I'll be quite blunt. I've had a number of people on to me and he said, "Have you seen the WhatsApp messages? Scott Robinson's lined up to take over." Whether Scott Robinson knows that, I'm not quite sure. And it's obviously it's not ideal, is it, for Wayne Pivac and his fellow coaches to be operating with stuff like that doing the rounds. I don't know what's happening. Have Wales been in touch with Scott Robinson? WRU? I couldn't tell you. Who does that at the moment anyway? It's a bit of a kind of a little bit of a leadership vacuum there at the moment. Obviously has been addressed with a new chairman coming on board and there's a new interim chief executive, but who would make that decision? I don't know. So what's going on behind the scenes? I'm not sure. The rumours are flying. Robertson's a very, very fine coach, by the way, and a good dancer. And if Wales are looking for a new head coach, he'd be right at the top of the list, I would have thought. But, you've got a game on Friday. This is the background against what is going to happen. Clearly, inevitably, if this Autumn Nations Cup continues in the same trajectory as France and Scotland, with defeats, say if Wales lose to Ireland, England, and let's say it's Fiji as the final game, and perhaps just get one scratchy victory over Georgia, well, the pressure and the intensity of scrutiny on Pivac and his coaches is going to ratchet up to, extraordinary levels. It's going to be enormous, and there will be outcry and there will be calls for change. Now, obviously, I asked the question in last week of Steve Phillips, the interim chief executive, whether it was true that there was a 2-year break clause to the contracts, the 4-year contracts of Wayne Pivac and his fellow assistants. The suggestion has been that come that 2-year point, which I guess is like November 2021, that at that point there would be an option for the WRU to make a change if they wanted to. Unsurprisingly, Steve Phillips says we don't comment on contractual relationships, so I'm not going to answer that one. So, again, you can conjecture on that. Now, that was an obvious. Clearly, if things continue to go wrong, I think if that is the case, then you would see they've probably got until next November to try and turn things around. But what happens if, come the end of this year, Wales have lost, 8 out of 9 matches, which could be the case? Will there be mounting pressure? Will the new regime, who've only recently taken over the WIO, feel the heat and feel the need to change things? The other part of it is, clearly, the union is in financial straits. Welsh Rugby is in financial straits generally. Challenging times because of the COVID pandemic. Can Welsh Rugby Union really be wanting to pay a coach off? I mean, I feel a bit bad that we're having this conversation about paying someone off and getting rid of them. It's not a laughing matter for them. And clearly, they will be busting a gut to try and get the results. But I think what we can say is you can see from everything that's going on out there, the pressure ratcheting it up. People are talking about a replacement already. This is, if Wayne Pivac was in any doubt about just how tough being Wales coach is and what it's like having 3 million selectors and chairman of the selectors and chief executives breathing down your neck, he knows now.
Absolutely. And let's wrap up with a little look ahead then. Obviously, Wales got Ireland on Friday night. Team announcement coming up on Wednesday. Been a bit of, in amongst all the Byron Hayward stuff at the press conference today, there was a bit of fitness update as well. What do you want to see in the team on Wednesday's side compared to the side that faced Scotland, for example? Are there any changes that you want to see in terms of personnel? We know Ross Moriarty is back in contention. Navidi a 50-50, as Wayne Pivac described it. And, some other players, Dan Biggar's back is fine by the sounds of things. What do you want to see from the team on Wednesday?
Well, good news is that Tipperick is over, I think, the tonsillitis that he had. So, he's going to walk back into the team at 7, and hugely experienced, world-class player. The one that's a little bit disappointing is you kind of hope the prognosis on Navidi was going to be a little bit more positive, because Wayne Pivac had talked a few weeks ago about Ireland being the target. Now, he hasn't ruled him out of the Ireland game, but 50-50 was the phrase. And when coaches use that phrase, you kind of probably don't expect to see the player involved the weekend. And that's a loss because I think above all, in terms of the forward pattern and forward play, Navidi's been the one that's been missed more than anyone, because the areas that Wales have struggled in, which is the clear out and the physicality, the ball carrying, he offers all those things and cover the entire back row. And if you look at that, the Grand Slam back row 2019, had a nice balance to it with Moriarty, the aggression, Tipperick, the wonderful footballing, and a load of the donkey work being done by Navidi. And, if Nav Josh was fit, then you could go back to that tried and trusted back row, really. And with Shane Lewis, he was obviously also having made an encouraging debut and in the mix there. But it does look like perhaps Josh isn't going to be fit for this weekend. So looking at it, you'd think Moriarty would probably come in at 8. It's not quite happened for Slippy Faletau. Hasn't quite been able to hit the heights of pre-injury days. So you'd probably look at maybe Shane Lewis is at 6, Moriarty at 8, and Tipperick at 7, which slightly better balance perhaps. Elsewhere in the team, you wonder what's going to happen with Nick Tompkins, don't you? He was the golden boy in the Six Nations. One game out in France, 1 defeat, and he's relegated from the starting lineup. Interesting to see if he comes back in. I guess again, you can only kind of go on what the coach says. And when I was asking him about moving forward to this new competition, he said that he felt Wales went into their shells in an attacking sense against Scotland, and what he wants to see is an expression and a ball in hand and playing with more attack. So if you're going to do that, you would think that Tompkins comes back in, wouldn't you? Because he does offer that attacking thrust. Elsewhere in the team, Samson Lee's back available, so that gives another option at tighter along with Thomas Francis. Louis Rees-Zammit is fit, Biggar is fit. So they've got lots to choose from. But I think clearly it all starts up front, and they have to address the clear out, the ball carrying, and just the efficiency of ball retention, because you need ball. You need ball in all rugby, but particularly international rugby.
All right, Si, we'll leave it there. We've got to get back to our writing jobs. Thank you very much for your time, Si, and thanks to you guys at home as well for all your comments. Sorry we couldn't get through all of them, lots of them coming in tonight. As we touched on then, Wales team announcement coming up on Wednesday, and we'll be back here on Facebook Live to discuss all the news from that right here on Wales Online.